Welcome, everyone. My name is David Elwood. I'm the Dean at the Harvard Kennedy School. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. This is obviously a remarkable afternoon. It's a great honor to welcome Secretary General Ban Ki-moon with us, to be with us tonight. I'm only going to say a couple of words, but I'm up here because Secretary General Ban is also a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, and one of our proudest moments was when he became the Secretary General. And as Secretary General, he has a rather full agenda, and it seems like it's getting more full every day. The kinds of priorities that he deals in range from peace and security, non-proliferation and disarmament, development, climate change, human rights, and UN reform. Those are his priorities as he stated them. All of these are central, quite honestly, to the future of this planet. During the time that he was here, he had the honor of working with a different dean, Dean Graham Allison. And Graham will be doing the honors, therefore, of introducing the Secretary General, and it's also the Secretary General is here to talk about a set of issues around nonproliferation and disarmament, where Graham is, of course, particularly expert. But let me just end by saying we all aspire to the highest values of making the world a better place. It is hard to imagine a human being on whose shoulders rests more, but on whose shoulders there is greater hope than for Ban Ki-moon. Thank you very much. Let me turn it over to Graham Allison, who was my predecessor and who built this forum and so much else. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a great honor for all of us here to be present today to welcome the Secretary General back to Harvard, the 8th Secretary General of the United Nations. I can remember way back in 1983, so that's 25 years ago, when this young man showed up here at Harvard as a Mason Fellow, and with Mrs. Ban, his wife, who's here, and we're very honored to have. And at that time, the school was somewhat smaller, and the dean would actually have the practice of welcoming the Mason Fellows, and so they came by, and I shook hands, and as he and I both remember, he shook my hand, and he said, "My name is JFK, just from Korea." And he was known by his classmates ever thereafter in the class as JFK. He's told more than once the story of how he was inspired to enter public service, which also is very much part of the biography of this institution. During a trip to Washington in 1962, with several hundred fellow students from around the world, he had the opportunity to visit the White House and meet President John F. Kennedy. And according to the transcript of the JFK remarks to those students on that occasion, the president said, quote, "It's most encouraging to have people here from so many different countries, including countries where the government leaders don't always get along. But I think the people do. What hope we can have for the future is in all of you," close quote. Now, who could have imagined that this would then be a student who would be at a school, the John F. Kennedy School, which wasn't in existence at the time, and who would then become the Secretary General? So I think for those of us who are participants in this Harvard community, to know that we're in a community in which some of us will rise up to do such remarkable things is an inspiration, and it's worth taking a moment to pause and appreciate it. In the case of our speaker today, Ban Ki-moon, he had been in the Foreign Service in Korea. He returned to Korea in the Foreign Service. He rose to be their foreign minister, his job just before he became the Secretary General. Prior to becoming foreign minister, he had served in his country's national security establishment as the foreign policy advisor to the president and as the chief national security advisor to the president. Through his career, he's had a great interest in peace and prosperity for the region and beyond, including inter-Korean relations and the nuclear dimensions of those inter-Korean issues. So as Secretary General, he's played a leadership role in thinking about global armament, disarmament, nuclear proliferation, nuclear terrorism, what can be done to deal with those issues. And in his current position, as a number of us had an opportunity to be involved with him earlier today in a brainstorming, he has to think about this from the global perspective, genuinely global perspective, in the only institution that reaches for global legitimacy. So we were talking about not just non-proliferation and disarmament, but climate change, about the global financial crisis, about global health, about global terrorism. So if you want to look at someone whose agenda is genuinely daunting, it's the Secretary General of the UN, but I would say we're extraordinarily fortunate as citizens of all countries to have this Secretary General serving in this time, and we're glad to have him here.
Thank you very much, Dean Ellison, for your very kind introduction. Dean Elwood, distinguished faculty members, students, and dear friends. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be back to the John F. Kennedy School. This is really a great opportunity for me in my capacity, new capacity as Secretary General of the United Nations, to return to visit my school, Kennedy School of Government. I must start by expressing my great regret, in fact, when I had to postpone my visit last May, when there was a very serious, devastating cyclone Nargis in Myanmar. So I had to rush to talk with the Myanmar authorities. With my direct intervention, fortunately, that people have been able to receive all humanitarian assistance, and even until today, this humanitarian assistance is flowing. And thank you very much for your understanding for that postponement. Now, I'm pleased to say how much I'm honored to be back again, meeting with my Professor Dean Ellison. Even I have my Professor Ezra Vogel here, who used to be my teacher. And looking at the faces of young students, that really reminds me of my school days, which I still regard as the golden times of my life. I have never had such a great time in my previous life. I have been always busy, but that does not mean that I didn't study much. But it was a real golden time for me. Last time I visited the Kennedy School was September 2005, when I was foreign minister. At that time, I brought some good news of the very historic announcement of six-party talks agreement. At that time, I brought very good news as well as an answer. But this time, unfortunately, I have to bring you some questions and call to action on our common challenges. These are something which I'd like to discuss with you today. Of course, I will state what I think in my capacity as a Secretary General, but I'm here to learn more from you, to learn some very fresh, creative ideas from young students as well as professors. I've had 2-hour-long, I think almost 3-hour-long discussions with very distinguished, prominent professors of Harvard University on major issues pertaining to our current challenges, global financial crisis, and climate changes, global health issues, terrorism, disarmament. And all these are the common issues, common global problems which we have to address together. That is exactly why I'm going to discuss with you today. Let me briefly recollect how I have really enjoyed now going back to my old days. It was 83 and 84. I'm class of 84. At that time, Dean Allison was very legendary dean for many, many years. And at that time, I couldn't even have an easy access to him. Not because he was a bureaucratic, but because of there are so many students. I'm just one of just JFKs, but just from Korea. Now, talking about JFK, I have had a very inspiring, a very brief moment of meeting then President John F. Kennedy at the White House, which really inspired me to think what should I be in the future? At that time, I really wanted to become a diplomat, serving for the nation. Now, I am much more honored to serve beyond the national boundary of Korea, to serve for whole international community as a UN Secretary General. That I'm very much grateful to both President Kennedy and also School of Kennedy for excellent teaching you have given me. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to express my sincere congratulations to all Mason Fellows who will be soon celebrating 50th anniversary next month. I have been very proud as a part of Harvard community, as a part of Kennedy School, and more importantly, as a member of Mason Fellow. Now we have among Mason Fellows, I understand that several have become ministers, and there are at least 4 or 5 heads of state or government at this time, and one due in no small part to your excellent teaching has become the Secretary General of the United Nations, and I'm very much grateful to this honor. As I said, we come together today at a time of intense crisis, unrelenting waves buffeting the world's people and institutions. Many months ago, when I spoke of the triple crisis, soaring food and fuel prices, and climate change, and also development emergencies. Now, all these triple crises have been compounded by this global financial crisis. With increased evidence of the effects of all 3 crises around the globe, by this ongoing shock waves of the financial crisis, my call to arms now seems distant and all too modest. Now, more than ever, I think the whole international community must be bold to address these issues. In these times of crisis, when we are tempted to look inward, it is precisely the time when we must move pursuit of the common good to the top of the agenda. Global solidarity is necessary and in the interest of all. Pursuing the common good will require addressing a set of global challenges that hold the key to our common future. I'd like to highlight 5 issues, as I have already told you. If I may repeat it again, ensuring global financial stability as an intentional first step toward prosperity for all people. Then addressing climate change, which affects whole humanity and whole this world. And thirdly, advancing global health and counting terrorism, and lastly, ensuring non-proliferation and disarmament. While these challenges may seem quite different at first blush, they share an important set of common characteristics. They are all interconnected, and that was confirmed by all distinguished professors of Harvard University through our meeting today. These global public goods distinguish themselves from other issues of concern because they endanger all countries, whether rich or poor, small or big, and all their people. And they cross borders freely without respecting the national geographical borders. And they are highly contagious. And they cannot be resolved without action by all. These challenges must be addressed by whole international community. However, a country may be powerful and resourceful, for example, like the United States. Even United States alone, and even the United Nations cannot address this all. But United Nations can mobilize all the resources and wills of member states of the United Nations. That means the whole international community. That's where United Nations is very well placed. That's where Secretary General stands. And the recent boom years brought about by increasing globalization, it became all too easy for us to take for granted global financial stability and the prosperity it facilitated. But the same thread of globalization that united us in the good times, and they are now biting deep in the bad times, especially for those who can least afford it. While recently we have heard much in this country about how problems on Wall Street are affecting innocent people on the main street, we need to think more about those people around the world with no street. Now, Wall Street, Main Street, no street. The solutions devised must be for all, you and myself and for all. At the United Nations, we focus daily on the for all, for all. This is what I've been saying, emphasizing all the times on many issues. We have to have a crisis-proof our agenda, especially in the area of development. In particular, we cannot allow the financial crisis to turn into a prolonged human crisis. That is why the race to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, which is set to target by 2015, has become even more pressing. Last month, I have convened a high-level summit meetings on Millennium Development Goals at the United Nations, where member states have committed $16 billion in one day. That was very encouraging and very generous. Those generous pledges now need to be kept, and all the new partnerships formed to achieve the MDGs need to forge ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, dear young students, now I'd like to turn to climate change, a truly defining issue of our era. Climate change is the ultimate global and existential threat. Its impact is documented with new evidence from around the globe every day. And its consequences will not be evenly felt. It's irony that those countries who have least contributed to this current phenomenon of global warming will be the hardest hit who do not have even any capacity to address this issue. United States and other industrialized countries, while they have contributed most, but still they have capacity, they have resources. Their position is much better now. Particularly developing countries, least developing countries, landlocked countries, and small island developing countries. They do not have any resources to deal with these issues. And so often, it will weigh heaviest on the most vulnerable, who have neither the resources nor the capacity to cope. Last year, this IPCC, this United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Al Gore for a decade-long effort which established that climate change was not only occurring, but accelerating. Now it has been clear, scientifically clear, that climate change, global warming is now happening. It is no longer a theory. This has become a fact of our life and has become imminent threat to whole humanity and to this planet Earth. We cannot afford to delay action any further. Professor John P. Holdren, whom I met this afternoon, regrettably, I think he must be lecturing now, vividly described the current situation as being in a car with bad brakes, driving toward a cliff in the deep fog. As the fog of scientific uncertainty has been lifting, no small part due to many of these universities' outstanding scientists, we increasingly see what lies ahead. And we surely know what we need to do on this issue. Steering clear of the cliff will require immediate action by all, including governments, the civil society, business leaders, UN bodies, and individuals like you. This summer, I launched a Cool United Nations, Cool UN. This is a very small initiative to help reduce our carbon footprint. I have asked to only raise the temperature from 72 to 75 by Fahrenheit. It resulted, you may be surprised, that in the reduction of 300 tons of gas emissions, which will be equivalent to 710 round trips across the transatlantic. Everybody was advised not to wear ties because the room temperature has gone up. We have given some small due consideration to the member states, delegations who are attending these all-important negotiations and conferences. We have given just 1 or 2 degrees cooler than staff, but all these small initiatives have resulted in very great substantive result. This is kind of some leading by example. I'm very glad that Harvard University also takes this leadership by example. Your university's sustainability initiative, which includes the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 30% during the next 8 years, is very welcome to me as a Secretary General. But in order to avoid Professor Holdren's precipice, we must conclude a new comprehensive deal, agreement, to replace the Kyoto Protocol by 2000, which will expire 2012. But by the end of next year, December next year, we must agree a universally acceptable and inclusive, balanced, and ratifiable treaty to replace this Kyoto Protocol. We took the first major step in Bali December last year. The member states have taken very good roadmap, and we are now heading toward this Poznan conference in December this year. Our next test will be in just 2 months, and if I may extend it by the end of next year. We need to come out from this Poznan conference in Poland this December with a strong political signal on strengthening financial and technology transfer mechanisms to help developing countries with adaptation and mitigation. Then we need a shared vision. What kind of agreement we have to agree next year, including the question of institutional architecture, as well as a concrete work plan for 2009 that will enable parties to engage in very serious negotiations without delay. Dear friends, I'll move to third issues, global health. That is another great challenge of our time, but also one with an immense scope for solutions. With increased travel, migration, and urbanization, a paradigm shift has occurred in the way we look at global health. Diseases and pandemics are spreading across borders today faster than ever before. And if not controlled effectively, these can have devastating impact. HIV/AIDS, avian flus, SARS are only a few examples. We also need to focus on the so-called neglected tropical diseases, which affect the poor all over the world. We have the tools and resources to treat and control many of these diseases. And we have the know-how to build health systems that serve all. Moreover, global health is receiving unprecedented attention and resources from new and powerful actors. At last month's MDG Summit meeting, our development partners came together to announce significant projects and pledges to combat tuberculosis and malaria. Our global malaria campaign has brought us within range of containing a disease that kills a child every 30 seconds. This gives us hope, and just as importantly, a model for achieving the other goals. We will be able to see soon this eradication of polio on the earth. And my target, my ambition is by 2015, we'll be in a much better shape in terms of eradicating malaria. I have set the target 2012, by which time the significant decrease in the number of people who will be killed because of malaria. But my campaign to eradicate malaria is moving very well, and I'm also working very hard on tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS. I've been attending many international conferences and trying to mobilize this national necessary resources and assistance. And on this HIV/AIDS, we must really help those people so that they can get cure and treatment and support and all this necessary assistance. All these commitments are very generous, and I'm very much encouraged and grateful for all governments and particularly business communities' strong support in global health issues. I welcome all these heightened activities by the international community, but it carries some risks too. The global health sphere is increasingly complex and fragmented, and there is no systemic approach to ensuring coherence of action. In addition, transaction costs are high and capacity is severely strained. We need to work in a more coordinated manner, each according to our comparative advantage, to strengthen health systems. We must move from building silos to building systems, and systems that work for the poorest and most vulnerable. I believe that the United Nations has an important role to play in the current fragmented health landscape, namely to be a convener and advocate for greater coherence and accountability among health actors. That is why I have been convening 40 global health leaders over the last year to develop an action plan to address some of the most urgent health priorities facing the world's poorest and most vulnerable. Now, another very serious issue is terrorism. This is another threat that can affect anyone, anywhere, at any time. We have seen so many devastating, tragic, brutal terrorist attacks against all the people around the world. Combined with the threat of weapons of mass destruction, it is perhaps the most serious threat to international peace and security. Terrorism is deeply personal. It kills our sons, daughters, and fathers and mothers, grandparents, and all our families. This was made powerfully clear when, at the United Nations last month, when I hosted the first symposium on supporting victims of terrorism. 18 victims, including Madame Betancourt, came to New York to share their stories, their challenges, and explain what short, medium, and long-term support was needed to slowly rebuild shattered lives. But they also gently scolded us that too often, still, it is the perpetrators who get the attention of the media, who get the attention of the world, not the victims. So we must shed light on this aspect too. 2 years ago, the General Assembly adopted the first global counterterrorism strategy. It was a milestone. The first time all 192 United Nations member states agreed together to formulate a comprehensive and collective and intergovernmentally approved plan to counter terrorism. This was the first time they agreed that conditions exist that can be conducive to the spread of terrorism, and that to gain ground, they must address these conditions. Last month, our member states came together again in New York to review the implementation of this strategy. We have come a long way, but we surely cannot stop now. I urged member states to take multilateral counterterrorism cooperation even further. For this, I outlined 3 principles. The first, we must be more innovative in developing our tools. We cannot shy away from promoting non-traditional approaches to security. Military force is rarely enough to bring an end to terrorist violence. Second, multilateral counterterrorism efforts must be undertaken in partnership with regional and sub-regional groupings, but also civil society organizations. Academic institutions can play a very important role in helping shed light on the multifaceted and evolving phenomenon of terrorism and political violence. Third, we need to better leverage our collective strength. While most resources and capacities for counterterrorism are found at the national level, the collective approach of the United Nations gives multilateral efforts a great advantage that we should maximize. Dear friends, I'm now coming to a final but also very important, serious subject. The world is facing acute challenges in the area of disarmament and non-proliferation. I come from a country that has experienced at first hand in my lifetime the ravage of conventional war and the threats from nuclear weapons of North Korea and other weapons of mass destruction. Such threats are, of course, not unique to my region. There is a widespread support throughout the world for the view that nuclear weapons must never be used again. We need only look at their indiscriminate effects, their impact on the natural environment, their profound implications for regional and global security. Thus, some now call this an emerging nuclear taboo. Yet if these arguments are so strong, why do such threats persist still? Why has disarmament remained only a noble goal rather than becoming a historical achievement? The answer requires little historical context. Disarmament entails the physical elimination of certain weapons as opposed to the regulation of armaments. Both goals are found in the United Nations Charter. In 1959, the United Nations adopted a resolution, very historic resolution on general and complete disarmament under the effective of international control, also known by its acronym GCD, a General and Complete Disarmament. This resolution combined the two goals of eliminating weapons of mass destruction and regulating conventional arms. In 1978, the first special session of the General Assembly adopted GCD as the ultimate objective of states in the disarmament process. As important as it is, however, GCD is not an end in itself. It serves an even broader global good, international peace and security. Unfortunately, I fear that few understand what this term GCD actually means. And I see little evidence that states are taking steps to ensure that their laws, policies, budgets, and bureaucracies are oriented to fulfilling this goal. Part of the explanation, no doubt, lies in the many misunderstandings of this term. Critics caricature it as an attempt to eliminate literally every weapon on earth. They have dismissed it as a utopian even. They have interpreted it as implying that disarmament must await the prior achievement of world peace. And they offer an alternative approaches to international peace and security, including those based on the endless pursuit of military superiority, the balance of power, doctrines of deterrence, technology restrictions, and other such measures. All of these, however, have their own weaknesses. Typically, they advance the interest of only specific states rather than the welfare and security of all. The great advantage of the GCD concept is that it recognizes that the ability to achieve a WMD-free world will require both the elimination of such weapons and additional changes in the way that states produce, develop, transfer, and use conventional weapons. In many regions, these are very closely related issues. The United Nations has long stood for the rule of law and disarmament. Yet it also stands for the rule of law in disarmament, which we advance through our various statements, resolutions, and educational efforts. We promote key treaties like the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty that have been signed but not yet entered into force. It was in 1999 when I served as a chairman of this CTBT, but still after 9 years, we have not been able to see this CTBT come into effect. We have still many countries who have not signed and who have not ratified this very important convention. The chemical and biological weapons conventions have still not gained universal membership. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, is facing a crisis of confidence. The United Nations, notably through its General Assembly resolutions, has also been developing criteria for inclusion in disarmament agreements. In his speech to the General Assembly in 1961, the President John F. Kennedy recognized the need for such standards, saying, I quote, "For disarmament without checks is but a shadow, and a community without law is but a shell," unquote. Yet there are still gaps in the law. Some key treaties remain to be negotiated, and new efforts are needed to create additional nuclear weapon-free zones, especially in the Middle East, and to bring existing zones fully into force. At a time when the world is focused on another more immediate crisis, let us never forget that we must press our efforts to address potential existential crisis which confronts whole humanity. It would not be responsible to do otherwise. I am pleased to see the leaders stepping up to move us in the right direction. I applaud the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament announced by the Prime Ministers of Australia and Japan recently. Dean Elwood, distinguished faculty members, students, and friends, America's great educator, Horace Mann, summoned humankind to be ashamed to die until you have won some victory for humanity. Achieving disarmament is one such a goal, and achieving financial stability and prosperity for all, addressing climate change and global health and international terrorism are others. Let us ensure that we all are equal to these very important tasks. And thank you very much. Now we have the questions.
So according to our normal forum procedures, we have opportunities for questions from the audience. There are 2 microphones here. There are 2 microphones at the loges. Please line up. Rules are short. Introduce yourself. Ask your question. And we're going to try for short questions and short answers because we've got lots of people who would like to ask questions. Let's start with this gentleman.
Hi, thank you again for coming today. My name is Will Rubin. I'm a junior at the college here. You mentioned that in your ideal world, we would have a new climate change treaty by the end of next year. And I assume that one of those goals would be to have the United States ratify that treaty. In your ideal world, what would the United States agree to in that treaty?
United States?
Yes.
United States must take a leadership role in addressing climate change. United States is by far the biggest greenhouse gas emission countries, and United States, fortunately, has the most resources and biggest capacity to address this issue. Therefore, I've been calling upon American leadership, President Bush and all others, to take this leadership. It's not only United States. It should be all industrialized countries who have contributed most to this current phenomenon. They have the capacity, they have the technology, they have the finance resources, but only what they lack is political will. As a Secretary General, my role is to galvanize such a political will. Now, I'm going to work very closely with the next President of the United States, whoever one may be, to take a leadership role. Then whole world is looking at how United States, next US administration will address this issue. We do not have any time to lose further. We have only 14 months. This is an issue which affects the whole humanity, regardless of where you are coming from, and even whole this planet Earth. So we must, the current leaders, including myself and whole leaders, must deliver this planet Earth to our coming generations with much more hospitable and environmentally sustainable world to our succeeding generation. This is our historical responsibility. And I call upon young leaders here to take your leadership. You will soon become the owner of this world, and I hope you will pay more attention, have ownership of this climate change and other global issues. And the whole world now depends upon your leadership.
This lady, please.
Rima Mary. As a Lebanese, I can tell you...
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Rima Mary.
Thank you.
As a Lebanese, I can tell you that one of the most difficult things that I've ever had to live through is the July 2006 war. Mr. Ban Ki-moon, this is a war that led to the complete destruction of my country, massacres at Ghana, for 2 years, I wasn't even able to go to the beach because of the oil spills that happened on the shores of Beirut. Civilian deaths. It was a tragic war on any level. Now, recently, the discourse in Washington, D.C. is that at least some people are selling the story now that the problem was not that Israel shouldn't have attacked Hezbollah. They should have attacked the whole of Lebanon. Now, this is the political discourse that some people are selling in Washington, D.C. And my question to you is, I really want to continue to have faith in the UN. And I want to know what the UN is doing. If it's not implementation of UN resolutions, what is the UN doing to make sure that the correct lessons are learned and to make sure that we end an era where we fight the war on terror with more terror? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I fully share with you all frustrations, and I have a full sympathy and support for all Lebanese people. The situation in Lebanon has been one of my top priority issues and top priority issues of the United Nations. And I have visited your country already twice, and I have been almost daily consulting with the leadership of your country. Now, there is encouraging development of situation with the formation of a national unity government led by President Suleiman. I met him just last Saturday again, and I've been constantly talking with the Prime Minister Siniora and the Speaker Berry and President Suleiman because people, and I believe that this is kind of some microcosm of situation in the Middle East. when you can have a peaceful resolution of this Lebanon situation, we can expect in other parts of the Middle East some smoother process of peace. Now, there is a very important role United Nations has been playing. You may be frustrated. I am also frustrated, but the United Nations has been taking very important political leadership role. And in terms of mobilizing resources for socio-economic development, I and other international leaders have been mobilizing through pledging conferences. I was very much encouraged when January last year, when there was international pledging conference, there was a huge commitment by the international community, such a strong support. Now the people and leadership of Lebanon must take this opportunity. Now there is very encouraging, again, situation between Syria and Lebanon. I have been discussing this matter with the Syrian President Assad. The establishment of diplomatic relationship between the two countries is very encouraging. And there has been such talks, border committee meetings, that you have full support and commitment of me as a Secretary General. So don't lose your hope. But at the same time, the Lebanese leadership and people should have more this reconciliatory work through inclusive political dialogue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman in the lodge, please.
Yeah, many thanks. Good afternoon, sir. My name is diegosorio. I'm a Mason Fellow, and I'm also been a UN officer for the past 10 years. Hello, both. How are you doing? Basically, I just have a question. Soon we're going to know who's going to be the next president of the United States. And perhaps that's going to give us a very sound window of opportunity to repair a relationship that in the eyes of many seems to have been affected for what's happening during the past 8 years. It's a matter of opinion, but it's certainly something that the partnership between the United Nations and the US has somehow been affected. Once we know who's the president, what is your strategy to seize that opportunity and ensure that that partnership delivers again for the world? Thank you.
That's very timely question, very good question, in fact, very important as well. I believe that the partnership between the United Nations and United States is crucially important for smooth operation of United Nations in meeting major UN development goals, major UN peacekeeping goals, and also human rights protections. Thus, I have been paying quite much time and energy in developing such a very cooperative partnership between United Nations and United States. By any standard, the United States is #1 leader of the whole international community, the largest financial contributor to the United Nations, the largest economy in the world, and largest technological innovation. You have all resources and power and capacity. Thus, it is required and anticipated that United States should take very important leadership role and contribute more to the United Nations. Unfortunately, during last few years, the relationship has been not desirable. Since I became the Secretary General, I'm encouraged that the United States and people and government have been paying more attention to multilateralism. I think this pendulum, historical pendulum, is swinging back to multilateralism. That's a very important trend. I sincerely hope, and I'm convinced that the next president of the United States will fully cooperate and take a leadership role in the United Nations, particularly in the area of climate change. There's a very serious developmental issues, meeting the Millennium Development Goals for the poorest of the poor people, billions of poor people. That they require United States leadership role. In fact, this gives me a good opportunity to again urge and appeal to American public that they should work very closely with the United Nations. After all, United States and United Nations share same goals and objectives: peace, development, and human rights. And United States was the founding member of the United Nations. In fact, they were one of the architectures of the United Nations. Therefore, their leadership is more than natural.
In the right lodge, please.
My name's Adam Cooper. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. Many of my peers at the Kennedy School who've worked at the UN have been inspired by its ideals, but frustrated by the way the organization works in practice. In particular, they found it overly bureaucratic and fails to promote people in line with their abilities. What is your strategy for recruiting talent from schools such as the Kennedy School?
I welcome all Kennedy School students, first of all. We have many Kennedy School graduates. In a narrow sense, many Harvard graduate in the United Nations system. But it's very important to have very young, good, talented staff in the United Nations, because we are dealing with all the issues which are happening around the world. Therefore, I would really hope that young students who have a vision of working for the common prosperity and humanity, then I would really strongly advise you to apply for the job in the United Nations. The doors are open, but sometimes you may be frustrated by all these bureaucratic processes. That is why I have set as important priority goals to reform through this change management change, to make United Nations more effective and efficient and transparent and accountable. Again, unfortunately, the appreciation level of the general public on United Nations has been quite low. Now I'm trying to really raise this level of expectation and appreciation by the international community. But that cannot be done overnight, and that cannot be done only appealing to the people. That is required for us to do more. And that's what I'm committed to do. You must have seen much changes in UN's normal operation of the United Nations work, in terms of accountability, in terms of transparency and effectiveness. And I'm asking my staff to be multifunctional, multi-skillful, and stand on the highest level of ethics. Therefore, future is yours. I would welcome all of you.
Just earlier when we were having a conversation, the Secretary General pointed out not only had he brought with him Bob Orr, who's an Assistant Secretary General, who was the Executive Director for Research at the Belfer Center, but he had done a little survey and found 8 Kennedy School students working in his immediate domain. So we were very proud of that. Gentleman here, please.
My name is Sung Yoon Lee. I teach international history and politics at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. I'm also an associate with the Kim-gu Forum at the Korea Institute at Harvard. 60 years ago, in 1948, a Korean statesman by the name of Kim-gu wrote an official letter to your predecessor, the first UN Secretary General, in recognition of the vital role of that nascent world organization in resolving the Korean questions of reconciliation, unification, and peace, questions that still resonate today, 60 years later. What do you foresee to be the role of the United Nations and your office in the event of the peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula in addressing the political, economic, and humanitarian questions, and perhaps also the gargantuan task of the reconstruction of North Korea? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. During last 63 years of history of the United Nations, if any member state, including myself, maybe asked what would be the most exemplary model examples of success story of the United Nations cooperation and intervention would be, I think, Korean Peninsula. The Korea was born through the United Nations and also was able to gain all this democracy and economic prosperity, which they enjoy now through United Nations assistance and assistance and cooperation of whole international community. Unfortunately, the Korean Peninsula is the only one still divided. Therefore, the reconciliatory path between the two parts of Korea through dialogue and exchanges and cooperation will be very much important and should be encouraged. United Nations has taken many important roles in facilitating the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Now that both South and North, together with other participants in six-party talks, they have almost agreed to disable and dismantling this North Korean nuclear process. That we have been welcomed. We have welcomed and also encouraged this process. I would continuously try to encourage and facilitate smooth implementation of the six-party process agreement so that Korea can be a fully denuclearized peninsula. Now, there are other areas of peaceful unification of Korean Peninsula that United Nations stands ready to facilitate an ongoing dialogue between the South and North. After all, all the pending issues on the Korean Peninsula should be resolved through peaceful dialogue, through peaceful exchanges and cooperation between the two parties. I would strongly encourage both parts of Korea to engage in further dialogue, to engage in further cooperation and exchanges so that the reconciliation will be made and so that the reconciliatory path will be widened and deepened. Thank you.
This lady on the left, please.
My name is Rachel Rienstra. I'm a doctoral student at the Harvard School of Public Health. Mr. Secretary General, thank you so much again for talking to us today. My question for you is regarding the situation in Burma, which you also referred to as Myanmar earlier today. As you know, the country of Burma is ruled by the military and has imprisoned the democratically elected leader for many years, Aung San Suu Kyi. And there are many people in Burma who are unable to even have access to basic necessities like food and medicine. And that was most evident, as you mentioned, during the Cyclone Nargis in May, when it took weeks for aid to reach the people that were hardest hit. Now, sir, I have read your statements on the country of Burma, and I know that you feel very strongly about democracy coming to that country. Now, you've just called us to action in all of these different crises that our world is facing, and clearly action that the United Nations is taking in Burma is not influencing the military there to take better care of its people and to pursue democracy. So My question for you is, what different actions can we in the rest of the world and the United Nations take to pursue democracy in Burma?
There are two aspects when we deal with the situation in Myanmar. One is democratization process as well as imminent humanitarian assistance. We have taken this humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian assistance are flowing. We will continue to do that. You seem to be more interested in democratization process. I am personally engaged, and I will continuously be engaged personally myself at my level as well as through my special advisor. The General Assembly has mandated me to engage in dialogue with the Myanmar authorities. Now, there is a very serious human rights situation, including these political prisoners, and most notably, Madame Aung San Suu Kyi is still under house arrest. I'm going to discuss this matter when I visit Myanmar, but still I'm considering when it would be most opportune timing for me to engage myself by visiting there. But I will continue through my good offices channel, and with the strong support of the Friends of Group, Friends of Secretary General, whom I have been working very closely to gain, first of all, political support and to influence Myanmar authorities to democratize their society as soon as possible. It may take some time, but I understand that the level of patience of international community is getting thinner and thinner. I'm very much conscious of that situation and will continuously be engaged myself on this issue. Thank you.
Because the Secretary General has to go back to New York for urgent business tonight, this lady in the Lodge will have the last question. So short question and a short answer.
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary General. Thank you for being here today. My name's Nima Khatri. I'm a second-year MPP student. And my question is, Stephen Peterson, who's a professor here at the Kennedy School, he argues that the Millennium Development Goals actually do more harm than good when it comes to developing countries. And he says that this is because it forces developing countries to cover their recurrent costs with volatile donor aid. So what are your thoughts on his argument?
Our world leaders in 2000 set out very important visions. This is a blueprint for common prosperity of international community in 21st century. There are 8 pillars, 8 goals in Millennium Development Goals, which must be met by 2015. As you know, last month, I have convened the summit-level meeting only to focus on this issue. I'm concerned at this time with this very turbulent global financial crisis. The political will as well as available resources may be affected negatively in our common efforts to meet this target of Millennium Development Goals. That is why I have been emphasizing strongly that while I would welcome all measures and initiatives of industrialized countries to address financial crisis, that they should not lose sight of the importance of this meeting Millennium Development Goals. I have been traveling many developing countries, and whenever I saw all these people, I have become very humble, and my resolve has been always stronger and firmer whenever I met them. And I have a very firm commitment to devote all my energy and time to work for this poorest of the poor people around the world. There are still almost 1 billion people who live with only $1 a day. If we expand, there's more than 3 billion people who live with only $2 a day. We must really help them so that they can have decent access to drinking waters, and we must cut by half the number of extreme poverty, abject poverty, by 2015. And we must cut this number of deaths, infant mortality, and also the women's mortality coming from complications of birth and pregnancies. This is very humbling situations. Therefore, again, there lies a very important political role of the United States and other developed countries. They must keep their promises. In 2005, 3 years ago, during their G8 summit meeting in Glen Eagle, they committed $50 billion a year until 2010. This has not come in full yet. And I've been urging, and I'm urging again, that they should keep this promise. I know that this financial crisis will be very much seriously affecting all of us, but at the same time, we should not forget the challenges and pains and difficulties of all these people. You have my firm commitment to meet this target. Thank you very much.
So it's been a great honor to have a distinguished graduate of the Kennedy School back here with us. We wish him well, and we look forward to his frequent return. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We'll take you out this way.